In the previous episode, we highlighted a lot about the whole tensions that DAOs face while doing the organizational canvas assessment. We now get into the cream of the episode, that is his time over at GitcoinDAO and how his experiences over there shaped his thinking around DAO design. We get into how he got the gig, what exactly were the issues that Gitcoin faced in general, and we also highlight how we also get into the mission and essential intent, how to develop that for DAOs, and to facilitate that sort of tough conversations that naturally happen when you're part of a DAO in general. We also get into trivia questions about DAO design. So this is a fun convo. I think you DAO design geeks will really love it. Enjoy the episode. I want to get more into the whole GitcoinDAO story that you kind of facilitated. Sure. For our listeners here, Sam Spurlin has worked very closely with GitcoinDAO, and I really want to understand more of how that whole story came through and what were the learnings from that for our broader DAO operators here. How did you get the gig in the first place, man? Let's just get into that.
Well, you kind of already mentioned the key person there. So Disruption Joe was kind of my first contact with folks at Gitcoin. And I'm pretty sure it was just through Twitter. Early on when Tanisi and I were trying to bring the Ready to DAOs, we made a concerted effort to try to share some of the Ready's foundational IP and our approaches to working with organizations on Twitter, but through a DAO lens, just to try to start making connections so that we could potentially bring this to more folks. Joe saw something that I had tweeted and invited me. We chatted a couple of times and invited me to come sit in on some of his work stream at Gitcoin's fraud detection and defense, so FDD. So joining his work stream and just trying to be helpful where I could. I facilitated some kind of strategy meetings for his work stream specifically. And then he was, a great ally to kind of bring me into Gitcoin beyond just FDD. So kind of thanks to Joe for, bringing me into Gitcoin. And then where I've been for since then is primarily at what Gitcoin calls their CSDO, their cross-stream DAO ops, which is really kind of the group of people. It's mostly the easiest way to conceptualize that group is kind of the leads of each work stream. And that group, that is who I've been working with and kind of helping. And then kind of I've transitioned from kind of Joe being my main kind of day-to-day, and I've been working with Jody and Chris kind of more on they're in the DAO ops work stream, and they've kind of been my connection into Gitcoin.
So for listeners who may not be aware of the broader Gitcoin structure itself, Gitcoin has a multiple player structure here. They have the foundation, which serves as the key funding, but they don't have a lot of the authority. The authority rests among the work streams. Within the work streams, you have the PGF, which is essentially the public goods funding, which essentially facilitates the broader grants rounds within Gitcoin. You have something called the Moonshot Collective, which essentially is the experimentation wing of Gitcoin, where all these dApps which can facilitate public goods exist. They also kind of supplement the broader product approach of Gitcoin. You have the Gitcoin Product Collective, if I'm not wrong, where all the product orientation around the Gitcoin main platform, the grants protocol, the Gitcoin passport, the entire development is done there. Along with that, you have FDD, where Disruption Joe and Sam essentially worked at. That's where all the algos and the cyber resistance to prevent all sorts of fraud and to ensure that money is sent to the right people at the right time, that's being done properly. These are the main work streams around that. Every one of them will have a certain bunch of leads for them to kind of facilitate their operations and to ensure that budgeting is done properly. You have a central, I would call it a hub more than an authority, where all these work streams come together. That's called this CDSO or CSDO.
CSDO.
I got that right? CSDO. That's where a lot of the broader cross work streams are kind of done. Now, stepping back for a second, now as the listeners understand that, okay, this is how the work streams are. You have Gitcoin that kind of facilitates a public goods funding through the grants program. you came in for the FDD workstream. What exactly were the issues that kind of got them interested to work with you in the first place? Because the way I see it, Gitcoin is a DAO which is one of the most well organized, at least from an outsider's perspective. The most in terms of branding, in terms of the community cohesion and that visual effect, no one has kind of been a better role model than Gitcoin itself. So I want to understand, the primary reason itself was to understand what made them cohesive also, and what were the kind of learnings from that. And that's part of the main reason for that. And I'm surprised to hear that they had a lot of these issues, and I want to understand more of what were those issues within the FTD that made them want to work with.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that I would say is that it was actually less a matter of there being like a bunch of acute issues that they wanted to work on, and more so like that group of people, like they are just incredibly curious and want to continually get better. So I think they were just very open to the idea of, this organization, the Ready, who has not necessarily DAO experience, but experience helping organizations, becoming more self-managed, becoming more effective, just versions of themselves. They were just, I think, had a very open mind to like, oh, there might be stuff here that we can learn, which is like major kudos to them to just have that kind of curiosity. So that's the primary thing, I think. Once, I got a little bit more involved with them, one of the things, the primary role that I played for a while was really more of just like an external expert facilitator, particularly around their budgeting process. So, each work stream needing to put a budget in front of their stewards, their token holders for approval. They didn't want to just do it in a completely siloed way. Like, it doesn't make any sense for FDD to make up a budget in complete isolation from GPC or any of the other work streams. So they needed help kind of creating a series of venues where conversations around budgets and what we're going to work on could happen across work streams. So facilitating those workshops, kind of half day, full day workshops every season for them was kind of my primary role in helping kind of tweak how they approach that. And through that, doing that the first time, it went fine, but it was pretty obvious to them and to me that it's difficult to talk about where money should go if we don't have a really clear sense of what are we here to do, which is the purpose and essential intent conversation. So kind of coming out of that first round of budgeting talks that I helped them with, they kind of made the pitch that like, hey, I have this thing in my back pocket called essential intent, and helping teams develop a purpose. If it's interesting to you all, I think it would help quite a bit. And they were down to do that. So facilitated a series of sessions around helping them come up with a team purpose and essential intent that they could bring back to the community and get feedback on. And they did a couple of rounds of feedback on. And if you go to Gitcoin's website and go to there's a link to a Notion page. If you go on the community tab, and then at the bottom it says get involved in the DAO. If you click on it, it takes you to a public Notion, and you can see what they landed on in terms of their purpose and essential intent, which is cool for them to like show that work publicly. And then now that they had some essential intent and a purpose, future budgeting conversations had an anchor. We could say like, okay, well, we're here to do these essential intent. Can we make an argument as to like why we're asking for money for this versus not for this? It became a much more cohesive conversation for them to have. I think they would all agree that there's still a lot of work to be done in how to budget in a more adaptive way where it's not a huge lift for these various workstream leads on a pretty regular cadence, because it is a lot of work. The system they've built for themselves is very labor intensive, but I think the essential intent work helped make a little bit more sense.
I think,
and the FDD stuff, actually, just to answer your other question, was actually kind of a very similar thing, but on a smaller level. So I think if I remember correctly, we kind of did some essential intent stuff, but purely within FDD. Given FDD's understanding of what they were there to do, what is their most important work? Are we resourced against it appropriately? So we just did that, what I did with the full CSD group, kind of on a smaller basis with FDD first.
Considering Disruption Joe heads FDD, I think he would have had a lot of work cut out for you in the first place. The guy is one of the most meticulous guys I've seen,
Yeah, so I give Joe a lot of credit. When I was talking about just like curiosity, I mean, the main person I was thinking of was Joe. Like he cares a lot about figuring out the best way to do things like this. He likes, from what I can tell, he really gets along with the operating system idea and is always a voice of trying to help Gitcoin define what their operating system is. And I think there's a lot more work to be done in the future around other parts of the canvas, but there's some really interesting experimentation happening within that DAO. I mean, the MMM group, memes, marketing, and merch, are experimenting with Murmur. So using this tool to come to agreement or come to decisions around agreements in a participatory way. The two leads over there are doing an amazing job to kind of push things forward. So I'm very bullish on this organization, both for their purpose, because I think what Gitcoin does is amazing, and also the quality of folks who are wrestling with what it means to do DAOs well. I've been very impressed with.
Absolutely. I mean, you see, I think the central reason for why they've become that way was the quality of their team that was there since the inception. Kevin Awaki, Joe, all these people, they cared so much about the whole public goods itself. You see the trajectory in which their entire journey went. I mean, even though public goods was their main focus, when the 2018 bear market happened, they had to shift to hackathons to get that sort of revenue for that public goods to survive, and to kind of get through two bear markets to come out with a very exponentially growing community. It's insane. And some of the problems with having that sort of community is that you tend to get lost with the community. But here they've been very clear about sticking to making that whole grants program as democratically accessible as possible. And it's not surprising that they've been able to hit $70 million in that sort of volumes given out to broader projects. I mean, so many. But the thing, what I want to come back to focus is that you joined in probably just a couple of months before their first anniversary as a DAO. What they did very well, even though they transitioned to a DAO, was they always had proper structures and they always understood in general of what their work streams were. They had proper documentation in place where you had key onboarding, the steward councils was there. You had I think FireEye's DAO come in to really structure how their DAO was being placed before GTC, the token, came out. So everything was well structured in place before all these teething issues. The issue that you mentioned about budgeting, I've been ardently reading Gitcoin. I mean, frankly, Gitcoin is a major interest for me, and the budgeting issue is a central issue. I think it's not like a secondary issue that you tackled right there. Budgeting is one of the toughest tensions that the Gitcoin community inside struggles with. I see the forums and the way they describe it. It's like, oh man, we're coming to the budgeting cycle again. There's so much fear within these people to kind of bring out whatever makes sense. And
it's a very emotional. It's a very emotional thing to do. And they try to. I think they do a good job of being respectful to each other in their disagreements, because if you're not having disagreements about budgeting stuff, then you're not actually making any decisions. So I think CSDO, is really kind of wrestling with that, and having Essential 10 is helping with that. But there is still way too much manual work that has to go into creating budgets and putting them in front of the stewards. But it's so multifaceted, because obviously stewards have a role there to weigh in and approve budgets. Stewards also don't have the same level of context to the work as the workstream leads or anybody who's actively working in the DAO has as well. Even though, Simona, I think, does a great job, and the others who are kind of working with the stewards to make sure that they have the information. It's a really challenging problem that I think I would suspect there's going to be kind of some more experimentation around, like, how frequently do they go in front of the stewards for budgets? Like, is it possible to get budgets for a longer period of time that are a little bit less specified, but we have trust that the work streams are going to use that funding appropriately, versus like having to go in front of the work stream or in front of the stewards every 3 months or every 4 months, whatever their season is, basically every quarter. That cadence feels, I think, unsustainable, at least at the same level of detail that they've been doing it at.
I think you're talking out of the experience, out of the ready, right? You've maintained that sort of trust environment for how, people within the ready are supposed to spend. And if you have that sort of culture where stewards are kind of not stewards, the workstream leads and the contributors are kind of shaped up according to culture, then why not give them a leeway according to that sort of budgets, right? But the issue here is, I've seen the conversations, and a key issue is most of these people, you don't need to quote me on this. This is just a normal convo. Where I feel a lot of the tension is that people don't know where to put that money into. They're so focused on the vision that there's not a lot of prudence about keeping things little lean. Also, especially considering the bear market, also you have a lot of opposing voices about keeping things lean. And another aspect that comes into play is, one is the how do you understand budgeting as a whole? Because work streams are kind of autonomous, so you need to understand financials also in a way to keep things going. That's the fuel, that's the lifeblood, right? And on the other hand, you have this constantly dynamic intent within Gitcoin itself. You have so many moving parts. You have the grants program, you have Gitcoin passport, you have grants protocol coming in, that whatever purpose and essential intents that you've built within these work streams, do they adhere to that in the first place or not? Because now, if you just take a look, Sam, yesterday, or probably within the last couple of days, Moonshot Collective, they've put in a proposal where they want to merge with the GPC now. Essentially, because of the bear market coming in, the Moonshot experimentations that they did are not like really working out. So now they want to like be merged within the GPC, and they want to like support whatever is going on within the GPC. That is kind of like a byproduct of what's going on with the market influencing that. My question is, where do you draw a line between focusing on the purpose and essential intent, no matter what, and kind of completely changing that to do what's best, considering the circumstance, Because you take a look at here, you have created all these essential intents, but it's changed because of circumstance. Is that a healthy way of doing it?
Yeah. So one way we think about essential intent is that we only, even though they are kind of at a 1 to 3 year, 2 to 4 year kind of horizon, we check in on them quarterly. So I don't know if they're due for a check-in on their essential intent. They probably are or will be soon. That is the type of conversation that's why we do a check-in quarterly, because the external environment is changing more rapidly than a 2 to 4 year kind of horizon. So the conversation around tweaking essential intent is specifically what you just talked about here. Like, are there things going on that are telling us that we actually either need to change this or pause it, or maybe there's actually a new one here that we really need to elevate? So that is like one way to just use that tool to be responsive to the moment. So that's where my head goes first. I think I had another thought, but it has left me. It may come back.
So the way I see it, it's like the purpose and essential intent is a byproduct of two things: about what your community cares for within the thing, and it's also a reaction to what's going on externally. Yeah. So when
I remember my thing now as well.
Go for it. That's exactly what I brought it up.
But the other thing that I was going to say is that we often, so part of that quarterly cadence, one of the things that we do is set what we call even over statements, which are just They take the format of X even over Y, and both X and Y have to be good things. But so, for example, you could have this be about strategy. You could have it be about like interpersonal stuff. So one we had at the Ready a couple of years ago was honest conversations even over team harmony. Like both of those are really good things. But for the next quarter, we really wanted to lean into like, we need to be able to have real conversations with each other, even if we think it's going to like cause discord among us. So I bring that up as a tool because that is the type of thing that you can use to respond to your environment as well. If you're in a really resource constrained place, or you're kind of worried about the bear market, I would imagine there are some even overs that the team may want to agree to, which will help them steer in that moment. And then what those are guardrails to constrain behavior over the next quarter. And we can agree, we can basically kind of call each other out if we're not adhering to these even overs that we set together as a team. So that's just another tool that you can use to respond to what is happening, around you. One example of an even over related to what they're doing may be like, all right, for the next quarter, like we're going to do like fiscal responsibility even over innovation, or like something like that. Like we're not going to spin up new things for the next quarter because we're trying to save money, as an example.
This aspect of conversations itself, underneath that whole purpose and essential intents, how do you bring in that sort of culture where people are comfortable to be, talking that sort of tough conversations? I think a lot of the underlying tension comes that, they're not comfortable having that convo. How do you bring in that comfort through in the first place?
Yeah, I think like anything, it is something that you practice and get better at. So it's just in a lot of cases, there's no like shortcut. There's no like special tip. There's just like, you do it more frequently. I think that having a facilitator who is external to the group, kind of in running the session where we're potentially going to have difficult conversations, helps kind of keep the playing field even and do some things to just make it easier for people to say those things. But there's also just like the commitment up front that, we'll do at the beginning of a session, and just this culture has where like these people like care for each other and they care for this organization, and they're willing to kind of lean into that discomfort to have conversations that are going to maybe be personally difficult, but in the service of something that they all care about, which is the success of Gitcoin. And that's not to say that like everybody is perfect at that all the time, but I think there is a general care to like being able to do this well. Like each of those leaders, I think, understands that that being able to do that, whether you like it or not, is just part of being an effective leader. And I think, we're talking about psychological safety here, basically. So what people have to believe and trust is that they can say something unpopular and it won't be a reputational harm to them. And there's no like magic bullet or magical lever to pull to like just make that naturally happen. It is something that builds over time as people see how themselves or others are treated when they are kind of the squeaky wheel. And if you're able to be on a team where you can not get like visibly impatient when other people are like bringing up difficult things, or you feel like we have to go back to something, I think that goes a long way to creating an environment where we can have those conversations, as opposed to where like, if, every time you say something that you think might be unpopular, you can tell that like everybody is like shooting you death glares, like you're going to be less likely to do that in the future. And part of that is having facilitation. Part of that is like just having a commitment to that as a group, that it's important that we be able to do this and we can disagree on ideas and not have that be an interpersonal disagreement. And the last thing I'll say, which I think Gitcoin does well, and we definitely try to emphasize at the Ready, is that in this like totally autonomous working world, completely distributed, it is, I think, important to come together in real life and get meals together, work in the same room together, and kind of renew those relationships that can be frayed when you're only working with someone through video or through Discord. It's a nice reminder that like, oh yeah, this person who's pissing me off right now on my screen is actually someone who I really like, and we had a great meal together a couple of weeks ago, and we're going to see each other again in a couple of months. that goes, I think, a long way to teams being able to have those kind of difficult conversations.
I think the aspect of building that sort of relationship, I think a lot of DAOs, I mean, they do try it when you kind of get to the nearest ETH India or the nearest ETH Denver. It's just one of those moments where teams can just come together to kind of have that personal connect. I think you made a fantastic point, that where teams kind of get wrong. I mean, this is personally, and I've suffered it. When you get too passionate about moving the community forward, you kind of take things personally, and you shouldn't have to do that when you're kind of getting into that sort of conversations. I think having that sort of context building before we have that sort of tough conversations. Yes, this is going to be a tough conversation. We can't expect everybody to be perfect also. It may get heated, but that's how people are. But in general, we do care about each other. We want the community as a whole to progress. People do make mistakes, but we all should be forgiving enough because we all want to get to a better place together. If we have all these aspects set up before the convo happens, I think it makes it much more easier, although you can't escape that sort of disagreements. I think having that sort of facilitator to kind of step in when things get dicey is really cool.
And even better than just when things get dicey, but to have thought ahead of time about the structure that we're going to use to have this conversation. Because just coming in and having no structure and a general topic that we think we need to talk about is generally, in my experience, not the best way to actually do it. There's a way to structure a conversation where, like, first we're going to do this, and then we're going to move into this, and maybe we're going to even be like in a tool like Mural where we are like putting ideas down, and like there are things that you can do as a good facilitator to create a container where that conversation can happen in a better way, rather than just kind of the free-for-all of people showing up and the people who are loudest and most pissed off talk the most.
Absolutely. And just kind of moving past that to have the sort of conversation which is necessary for the community, I think it's key. But I want to step back, you've created this mission and essential intents for the broader for the FDD and for these work streams, right? What are some of the challenges that you saw within the community to create that essential intents, and what would you give? What are the pointers that you would give other DAOs who are trying to create that sort of intents within their own work streams, and what are the best ways of doing it? What are the mistakes you should avoid?
I think the most common challenge that I see with it is that organizations feeling like they have to get it perfect. Because the word essential is right there in it, right? Like if we don't get this right, then we've like really screwed ourselves. But I think that one of the principles that I'm always talking about is progress even over perfection. So like your first stab at writing down essential intent, like they're going to be wrong. Like you're going to look at them in 4 months or a year from now and you're going to be like, yeah, that was not actually the thing. But the important thing is that you captured it in that moment. And now we have something to talk about and kind of judge and compare what we currently think to what we thought before. That's the true value of the tool, not necessarily nailing it on the first try. So helping a team kind of relax a little bit about that while still taking it seriously. Like we do want to actually make some decisions here. Like, and if we're not making trade-offs, then we're not actually talking about what is essential. So how can we bring enough specificity to the essential intent that we're coming up with that it feels like a real thing, without getting so precious about it that we feel like we can't move forward with it. And then the other thing that is just always a challenge is that you have lots of different perspectives about what is the most essential work to be done. And we have kind of different worldviews and different value systems around like, what do we care about the most? And teams have to talk about that. They have to work through that. And that's, partially the difficult conversations, because sometimes and very frequently at the end of the day, after you've articulated your essential intent, you realize there are things that we are currently doing that are not part of the essential intent. And you have an option at that point. Maybe it's still important and we want to keep it going. We want to still invest in it. Which is fine. Like an essential intent is never going to be like the only thing that we do. What is really going to matter is when we come back together in 4 months and we ask ourselves, like, what progress have we made on this essential intent? Hopefully we can say that we've made progress. And if we haven't, then maybe we need to have some more difficult conversations around, well, maybe this essential intent is wrong and we just need to get rid of it. or maybe there are other things that are not in our essential intent that are distracting us from this thing that we still think is very important. And then, that leads to conversations about how we actually are going to resource or prioritize this thing. But, if you're going to be saying no to things, that is challenging. And if you're not saying no to anything, then you're not talking about what's essential.
Absolutely. Having that sort of, essential intents really prioritize what really matters. And sometimes DAOs, what they do, I mean, the best example is what Gitcoin is currently doing with the Moonshot Collective. There's so many dApps that are being built to further public goods funding, but kind of allowing for that merge with the GPC when the bear market's kind of at a high, it's just kind of being rampant right now. You prioritize resources to the GPC itself, because underneath all of that, you understand that, okay, moving forward, the broader concept of public goods is what matters. And having that sort of the lack of ego to be able to adhere to what matters essentially really counts that way. And having that written down to kind of be a North Star, it's pretty critical that way. That's pretty neat. And so stepping back, now what excites you about the DAO space going forward? I know that lately you've been really excited to work with a lot of DAOs and things like that. What are some of the things that you find fascinating within DAOs that you want to get to work immediately with? And
yeah, just generally, I am fascinated by just the degrees of freedom within DAOs. What I mean by that is just nothing has really been written in stone in any DAO, because they haven't been around long enough, and there's just so much experimentation happening. Like my life at the ready prior to getting involved in DAO stuff is basically at the other end of the continuum. Like in the bureaucracy chaos continuum, I have lived primarily in the bureaucracy end for a long time, which I think is still really fascinating, and I like doing that work. But it has been a great, I think, exercise in my own abilities as a practitioner to be showing up at the other end of the continuum, which is the chaos end, which is what's going on in a lot of DAOs. And the optimist in me is really excited by that, because there's interesting stuff to be done across the operating system in DAOs. So I want to really help, especially brand new DAOs, figure out what does it look like to go from 0 to 1 with your operating system? I know I talked before about not over optimizing or creating too much structure up front, which I still believe, but I think there are probably a handful of key decisions to be made about your operating system very early on, that if you kind of nail those early, things are just easier down the road. So I want to both figure out what my take is on that, and then find some places, some DAOs that will experiment with that. I think there's a great opportunity there. That's the main. I guess the other thing that I'm really interested in, and I've been doing more, is kind of helping DAOs that want to play with Murmur, which I've mentioned a couple of times, but that software company that we spun out. There are a handful of DAOs that are doing some experimentation, and to the extent that I can kind of be a conduit between them and the development team over at Murmur, but also kind of help them implement from a org design kind of coach perspective, I'm really optimistic that a tool like Murmur could be just a foundational part of the tech stack for most DAOs. So I want to do what I can to help with that.
Amazing. I think when it comes to early stage DAOs that you're planning to tackle, I think you have a lot of DAOs out there. Every day, I think you have so many DAOs coming in. I think at this point, I think we have around 5,000 DAOs in total. Yeah. And I think it's just going to be an exponential growth from this point onwards. And you see, at least personally, I've been a part of a lot of these DAOs, and the reason for why they failed was this confusion around what they were supposed to do, or kind of facilitating resources towards that in a kind of a sustainable way. Confusion around purpose, and a lack of proper resources around that as well. So for you to come in, having learned from Gitcoin and all these, Tradogs itself will be a massive boost for DAOs to come in. So any DAO, DAO design geek out there, just do drop a message to Sam. He'll be happy to.
Exactly. My DMs are open on Twitter. I will happily chat with anyone about anything that you heard me talk about today.
Absolutely. And especially us. I mean, we'll be keeping in touch for a lot of other topics besides this as well. So you'll be hearing a lot from us. And before we just kind of wrap it up, who are the best org design thinkers out there that you kind of really enjoy reading from within the DAO space?
Yeah. I don't know if a couple of the folks I have on this list here are in the DAO space, but I think there's a lot for DAO folks to learn from folks who are not specifically in the DAO space. So I would definitely be remiss if I didn't mention, all my colleagues at the Ready, particularly Aaron and Rodney. They have a podcast called Brave New Work, which is also the name of the book that Aaron wrote. There's a lot of good stuff from there. They did a mini series with Chase Chapman a while ago, kind of specifically kind of bringing some of our ideas of org design to DAOs specifically. In terms of others, kind of non-DAO folks that I think are doing good thinking around just org design in general. John Cutler on Twitter. I should have written down all their tags, but you'll find them if you search for John Cutler, Stowe Boyd, and Tim Casasola. Three friends of mine who I think are doing great work. Ted Rao from Sociocracy for All. Sociocracy has a lot to offer to DAOs as well. And then kind of in the DAO space, so Spencer and Nick from Hats Protocol. I think Hats Protocol is really interesting. A lot of the stuff that I was talking about, roles and role clarity. I've been following kind of their stuff pretty closely. And then Dan Wu from Orca, now known as Metropolis. Dan's great. Great thinker and also pretty good at TikTok.
Yeah, I'm not on TikTok, but I do see what he shares.
I only see his TikToks through Twitter. Yeah.
Yeah, same. It's pretty funny though. Dan was pretty nice also. And you mentioned Spencer and Nick, pretty wonderful thinkers. But the main guy over there, David Ehrlichman, phenomenal. What to say? I love this book, Impact Networks. I think it's kind of shaped how a lot of DAOs also kind of function. Especially we had SCRF come in onto our show, and they really made their structure around facilitating learning and action-oriented networks for their own structure. That's pretty lit to see. Also a big fan personally of Joe from Gitcoin.
Yeah, of course.
Absolutely. You can't, when it comes to these sort of discussions, you can't ignore the guy.
I feel like I should have put him on my list, but I pumped his tires pretty good during this episode. So.
Yeah, I think, we need a little bit of a bare face for the guy now. I think we pumped him up too much. Yeah. But another one that I really, I enjoyed, I think DAOs, some of the main DAOs in general, where a lot of the discussion around org design itself, they present a lot of insights that could kind of help you reshape a DAO. Before I came for this interview, I had read a lot about Radical. They had done a lot of thinking around how they had to structure their org design. Gitcoin, then also Bankless to some extent. Yeah, phenomenal conversations out there, and you learn about where they failed, where things are kind of going wrong, and you can learn from that to kind of to help broaden your own org design also. So pretty lit. So stepping back for a second now, I think it was a wonderful conversation that we had. I think we covered a broad spectrum in a very kind of digestible manner about meetings, about creating that sort of mission and essential intents. And we've covered so many things around organization. It was great to have you for this convo, Sam. Thank you so much for doing this. I know that we could have gone in for a day if we had to. There were so many variables that we could have covered, but then we have our own this thing. We enjoyed having you over, Sam.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. It was I like going deep into this stuff. I feel like I've done a lot of podcasts where I just kind of had like skim across the surface of what we do. So it was nice to go a little bit deeper.
Absolutely. That is part of the primary reason we wanted to try out this. We want to go in and really come out with that sort of insights, and just having that sort of leeway really helps us. So for people who want to maybe want to step away from the podcast and connect with you personally, what are the best ways to do that? Or are there other initiatives that you would like people to follow also?
I mean, the best way to contact me, at least in this moment, who knows, in the coming weeks, is Twitter. At Sam Spurlin. It should be easy enough to find. My email is sam@theready.com. I actually do like receiving email because I don't get very much because we don't use email at the Ready. So like, if you land in my inbox, like that's like you're gonna get my attention. And then the ready.com to learn more about the Ready. I think we're going to be creating some more landing pages that are more DAO specific in the future. So I'll definitely be tweeting about that as we create it. But yeah, those are the places primarily.
Absolutely. And we will be happy to kind of link that in the description. So do check it out after the podcast's done. Along with all the bunch of organizational design thinkers out there, we'll have all those links out there for you to check out. So with that, we wrap up the episode. It's been phenomenal. Do look forward to the other episodes that we have lined up for you. And with that, we close the show. Have an amazing day ahead of you.